The stars were dying. They did not fade as the mortal eye might expect, but rather bled out, their light unraveling into thin ribbons that were drawn toward a wound in the fabric of reality. The eye of terror pulsed in the void, a cosmic infection swelling and contracting, casting its sickly red glow across the void like a god's heartbeat. The fortress world of Cadia hung on the edge of that abyss, a lone bulwark against the ancient hunger beyond. Before I begin, know this, we care for you, not in the idle way of passing words, but in the deep, unshaken way a sentinel cares for the one they guard. You matter here. Your time matters here. Before we march together into the long night, tell me, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it there? Now, my friend, grab your coffee and let's get started. Once, Cadia's orbital bastions shone like a necklace of steel and light around the planet, each one a hammer to shatter the skull of any who dared approach. Now they flickered, some extinguished entirely, others leaning in their orbit like crippled sentinels. Below, the planet's continents were blanketed in defense lines, bastions, trenches, and the scars of wars that had never ended. The world was not merely defended, it was a fortress in the shape of a planet. And yet, for all its walls and guns, Cadia trembled. Lord Castellan Varanth stood within the command spire of Castle Vortigaunt, its vast adamantium ribs stretching high into the misted sky. The glasscrete before him displayed the void in real time, great clusters of enemy ships shifting like a tide of black glass. His eyes, grey and unreadable, betrayed nothing to those around him. Yet deep within, the weight of centuries pressed down like the armor he wore. Varenth had lived longer than the records dared admit. He had served under Primarchs when the Emperor's light still blazed across the stars unchallenged. He had seen the rise and fall of imperial crusades, the shattering of worlds, the coronation and death of heroes. To most, such a life would be a gift beyond imagining. To Varanth, it was a chain that bound him to an endless cycle. Build, defend, watch it burn. Repeat. Lord Castellan, came the voice of Captain Serana Kine from behind him, sharp and disciplined. Outer void bastions are reporting contact. Enemy formations are unusually spread, almost as if they're herding us, Varenth finished quietly. His voice was a calm blade's edge. They will drive our fleets where they wish them, and we will let them. Serana frowned, stepping closer. She was young by Cadian standards, perhaps not yet past her second decade of service, but already carried herself like a fortress wall. Her loyalty was iron, but her trust. Varenth had seen the flickers of doubt in her eyes before. She had read the sealed records, the rumors of his unnatural longevity. You expect us to cede the outer ring? She asked. I expect them to take it, Varenth said, eyes still fixed on the swirling enemy icons. If we bleed our strength there, the gate will fall before the true blow is struck. Outside, the void shifted. From the heart of the Eye of Terror, the darkness deepened. Warp storms flared like crimson lightning across the fabric of space, illuminating shapes that had no right to exist. Titanic silhouettes of the Black Legion's warships, their hulls wreathed in screaming auroras of damned souls. And at their center, the War Master's flagship. Varenth's jaw clenched. He had known this moment would come. He had seen it in dreams that were not dreams, visions whispered by the warp in moments of unwanted clarity. In every strand of possible future, Cadia burned. The only variable was the cost. Serana's voice brought him back. Shall I ready the 7th and 8th armies for counter-orbit deployment? Hold them in reserve, Varenth replied. We will need them when the surface begins to break. Serana hesitated, as though on the verge of protest. With respect, Lord Castellan, the men will question why we don't. They will question nothing. Varanth cut in, his tone sharper now. They will fight where I place them, and they will die there if needed. Silence stretched between them. Outside the command spire's viewport, a line of light swept across the void. The first exchange of fire between Cadia's defense platforms and the Black Legion's vanguard. Thousands of kilometers away, ships died silently, their deaths marked only by blossoms of light and debris that drifted into the abyss. Varenth stepped closer to the viewport, the reflection of the dying stars catching on the silver thread of a scar running down his cheek. "Do you see them, Captain?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "Do you see how they come? Not like a storm, but like the tide, slow, patient. I have fought this enemy for longer than I care to recall. They will not be rushed. They will break us piece by piece, so that when the end comes, there is no one left to resist. And yet you stand here," Serana said, her voice softening. "And yet I stand," Varenth murmured. In the depths of his mind, another voice stirred, a voice he had not heard in over 4 centuries. "Brother." The word was not spoken aloud. It was the echo of an old betrayal, one that still bled in the hidden chambers of his memory. He tried to push it aside, but it coiled tighter, as if the eye itself were reaching for him. An aide hurried into the chamber, snapping a salute. "Lord Castellan, we have confirmed warp breaches in low orbit. Small, but increasing in frequency. Castor Myrak reports contact with demon entities in the upper atmosphere." Varenth's eyes narrowed. So it begins. From the eyes gaping more, a flare of light, not pure, but the diseased glow of the warp, erupted. It spilled across the void, touching the edges of Cadia's orbital defenses, making the great bastions shudder as if in pain. For a brief moment, Varenth thought he saw shapes moving in the light. Not ships, not solid things, but vast, winged shadows that screamed without sound. Serana's hand tightened on the pommel of her sidearm. "Orders!" Varenth turned, his expression unreadable. "Begin surface lockdown. Recall all void patrols to defensive stations, and ready the planetary command for prolonged siege." "You believe they'll land this early?" "They always land," Varenth said, his voice heavy with the certainty of someone who had seen the same tragedy play out across centuries. "The enemy will make this personal. They know Cadia is not just a fortress. It is a symbol, and symbols must be broken by hand." Outside, the stars continued to bleed into the wound in the sky. The planet shuddered as the first impact tremors reached the surface. Not from artillery, but from the weight of something vast and hateful pressing against reality itself. The fall of Cadia had begun. The eye of terror swelled like an infected sun. Its edges writhed, folding into themselves, birthing storms of impossible geometry that flickered and vanished in the span of a heartbeat. Each flare cast sickly crimson light over Cadia's continents, washing every fortress, trench, and bastion in the color of blood. The void beyond was no longer space, as mortals understood it. It was a wound, and the galaxy bled into it. Lord Castellan Varenth stood in silence within the strategium, the chamber's hololithic projectors spinning a great 3-dimensional display of Cadia's orbital plane. Thousands of tiny icons, Imperial defense platforms, battleships, and fighter squadrons glittered in delicate formations. Beyond them, the enemy swarm gathered, jagged black shards against the projected void. The gaps between those formations were no accident. They were corridors, kill zones, ambush paths, the first movements in a siege that would not end until one side was ashes. Varenth's fingers tightened behind his back. He had seen this pattern before, not on Cadia, but on worlds whose names were now dust, defiant planets that stood until the tide of chaos decided they had suffered enough, and then were drowned in blood. Captain Serana Kine entered, helmet under one arm, her armor flecked with soot from the surface defenses. "Lord Castellan," she began, "we've fortified the Casa Mirak perimeter and shifted heavy artillery to cover the northern corridors. Margos Irix reports the outer bastions are holding, but he insists the warp flux is unlike anything in recorded history." Varenth did not turn. "That is because history is written by the living, Captain, and few live long enough to record such storms." Serana hesitated. Her loyalty was not in question. Not yet. But she had begun to measure his words more carefully, as though listening for something beneath them. She stepped closer to the hololith. "The flux could destabilize our Geller field harmonics. If the storms breach them, even for seconds, the void will pour inside our ships and strip the flesh from our crews," Varenth finished, his tone calm, almost clinical. "Yes, I know." He did know. He had known such details before they had names. He had seen ships melt into living shapes, their hulls breathing like lungs, the screams of their crews becoming part of the metal's groan. Immortality was not a chain of years. It was a chain of sights you could never unsee. Serana studied him for a long moment. "Forgive me, Lord Castellan, but how do you know these things before they happen?" His eyes flicked toward her, cold as the void outside. "Because I have fought this war longer than you have drawn breath." That silenced her, but it did not erase the question. From the far side of the strategium, the ancient servo doors hissed open, and Magos Irix entered. The tech priest was a tower of whirring limbs and incense hissing vents, his once human frame almost entirely replaced by gleaming brass and steel. His voice was a chorus of vox tones layered with the human tongue beneath. "Lord Castellan," Irix intoned, "my auguries confirm abnormal warp compression at the perimeter of the eye. The readings are escalating. Cadia is no longer simply defending against a fleet. The barrier between materium and immaterium is thinning." Serana stiffened. "Warp breaches. Localized." "For now," Irix replied, turning his sensor cluster toward her before facing Varenth again. "However, projections indicate that the breaches will increase exponentially. We are witnessing not a conventional invasion, but a prelude." Varenth's gaze did not waver from the hololith. "A softening of the prey." "Precisely," Irix answered, a hint of static crackling in his vox. "And if the breaches spread to the surface, they will," Varenth said simply. The silence that followed was heavy. Outside, in the cold dark, the enemy fleet shifted again. One massive icon slid into the hololith's center, the War Master's flagship, its scale dwarfing every Imperial vessel in orbit. It was a cathedral of war, its spires bristling with weapon batteries, its hull plated with relics torn from 100 conquered worlds. The sight of it seemed to dim the strategium's light, as though even a representation of it was enough to steal brightness from the air. Serana's voice was low. "You've faced him before." Varenth's jaw tightened. Not him, but his kind. The hand that strikes changes. The will behind it does not. A ripple passed through the hololith. At first, Serana thought it a glitch, but then the air in the chamber seemed to thicken. The images flickered, and in the brief distortions, her eyes caught shapes not rendered by any Imperial device. Eyes of fire, teeth like continents, shadows that moved with too many limbs. She stepped back, instinctively, her gauntlet resting on her sidearm. Varenth's voice dropped to a whisper. "It has begun." Without warning, the hololith flared, projecting a new set of crimson icons planet-side. Warp rifts, small but multiplying. Irix's mechadendrites twitched, his voice rising in pitch. Breach events confirmed in upper atmosphere. Multiple demon signatures. I advise immediate reallocation of ground forces. Denied. Varanth cut him off. Hold the line at orbit. If the void is lost, the surface will be nothing but the next battlefield. Serana turned to him, frustration flashing in her eyes. With respect, Lord Castellan, we can't ignore. Respect is obedience. Varenth snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut steel. Do as ordered. She swallowed her words, but the fissure in her trust widened. Varenth turned back to the viewport. The eye loomed there, impossibly vast, its edges boiling with warp storms that clawed outward in slow, deliberate hunger. In the heart of that abyss, something moved. Not a ship, not a fleet, but a presence, a pressure. It was the weight of an ancient hand resting on the galaxy itself. And in the depths of his mind, he heard the voice again. Brother. This time it was clearer, colder, and it carried the faint echo of laughter. The memory rose unbidden. A fortress on another world, millennia ago, burning under a crimson sky. His brother in arms, blade dripping with the blood of their comrades, eyes already alight with the warp's glow. The moment when Varanth had chosen duty over blood and struck the killing blow. The moment he learned that some enemies could never truly be killed. He closed his eyes briefly, forcing the vision down. When he opened them, the War Master's flagship filled the viewport, as if it had drawn closer in those stolen moments. Irix's voice broke the spell. Lord Castellan, enemy strike craft are vectoring toward the surface. They appear to be targeting civilian districts. Varenth's gaze darkened. They want panic. They want symbols to burn. He stepped forward, his voice carrying the weight of command. Signal all cassers, lockdown protocols, total mobilization. And tell them this, no ground yields without blood. If the enemy wants Cadia, they will have to bury themselves in its soil. Serana glanced at him, the flicker of doubt still in her eyes, but also something else now. A question. Not of his tactics, but of whether he truly intended to survive this. The first planetary alarms began to howl across the Vox. The sky above Cadia was already changing, clouds boiling into unnatural spirals as warp lightning bled across the horizon. In the eye, the storm's heart pulsed once more, a heartbeat the size of a star. The wound in the sky was widening. The alarms had not stopped for 12 hours. They howled over Cadia's fortress cities, echoing through streets choked with evacuees, across trench lines already slick with oil and blood. Vox channels crackled with half-heard orders and the screams of the dying. Above, the wounded heavens burned, Black Legion cruisers drifting in slow arcs, shedding fire like molten scales. And through it all, the Eye of Terror loomed, its wound widening with patient, inevitable hunger. Lord Castellan Varenth had barely left the strategium. He stood now over a hololithic projection of Cadia's surface, its continents bristling with crimson impact markers. New breaches bloomed every hour, scattered in no predictable pattern. Yet something in them troubled him more than their number. They were too deliberate, too surgical, as if someone on Cadia had shown the enemy exactly where to strike. Captain Serana Kine entered the chamber, her armor still streaked with the soot of Casser Murak's defenses. She removed her helmet, tucking it under her arm, and came straight to the hololith. Lord Castellan, I've compiled intercept logs from the 6th Artillery Regiment's command vox. You'll want to hear this. Varanth's eyes did not leave the display. Summarize. Her jaw tightened. Encoded transmissions were sent from within the inner command network during the last assault. Not our encryption. They were aimed outward. That made him look at her. His gaze was steady, unreadable. Origin? Serana hesitated. Somewhere inside Casa Vortigaunt. The chamber's air seemed to still. Around them, servitors clanked along the edges of the room, tending to the great projectors, but the sound felt far away. You are suggesting, Varenth said slowly, that there is a traitor within the planetary command. I'm saying, Serana replied, that someone is sending enemy forces exactly where they can do the most damage. Civilian districts, supply convoys, anti-orbital arrays. Every strike has been surgical, Varenth finished. His voice was calm, but inside, the chain of suspicion began to tighten. He had seen traitors before. Sometimes they were fanatics, their souls already promised to the warp. Sometimes they were pragmatists, seeking survival in the shadow of defeat. And sometimes they were neither. Sometimes they were ghosts from a man's own past. The thought made something cold pass through him. From the opposite side of the strategium, Magos Erix approached, mechadendrites swaying in restless motion. Lord Castellan, I have been examining the breach patterns. They are not random. They are following a map. Varenth's eyes narrowed. A map of what? Of Cadia's defense grid, Irix replied, vox tones flattening. The grid's classified layers. Even among command, few know all of them. Serana looked between the two of them. Which means whoever's feeding this data has access to the deepest level of our tactical vaults. The three of them stood in silence for a long moment, each following the implications to their inevitable conclusion. Finally, Varenth broke it. Lock down all encrypted channels. Any signal not cleared through my personal command is to be blocked or erased. And, Captain, yes, my lord, you will investigate, quietly. I want the traitor alive when you find them. Serana nodded once. There was no hesitation in her voice, but her eyes searched his face for something. Perhaps a flicker of personal investment. She found none. As she left the chamber, the voice came again. Brother. It was clearer now, close enough to feel the breath on his ear, though there was no air to carry it. You are dead, Varenth whispered under his breath. Not as dead as you hoped, the voice answered from inside his skull, his hands curled into fists. He had not heard that voice since the siege of Pyrrha Secundus 4 centuries ago. His brother in arms, his truest companion in war, had stood beside him through 10 crusades, until the day he opened Cadia's gates to the enemy and called it salvation. Varenth had cut him down himself, a blade through the heart, watching the light die in his eyes. But the warp was a liar, and liars had a way of finding their way back. Magos, Varenth said aloud, forcing the moment back under control. Continue your breach analysis. I want every rift's trajectory plotted. If they form a pattern, I want to know before the enemy completes it. As you command, Irix replied, bowing slightly before retreating into the shadows of the chamber. Varenth turned back to the viewport. The enemy fleet still hung there, vast and silent. Then, without warning, a ripple of crimson fire swept across the void, as though the eye had inhaled. The flagship's silhouette shifted, not closer, but sharper, more defined, as if reality itself were bending around it. He watched it for a long time, unblinking. The voice inside him was silent now, but its absence felt worse than its presence. Hours later, Serana returned. Her expression was taut, her armor dented from a skirmish. "Lord Castellan," she said without preamble, "I've traced the transmissions. Whoever sent them knows our patrol patterns. They've been moving between command sectors, masking their signal with legitimate priority orders. Show me." She laid a data slate on the tactical table. The path lit up in crimson, winding, deliberate, looping back into secured areas only accessible to high command. Varenth studied it. His eyes stopped at one sector in particular, the governor's private quarters. He said nothing for several seconds. "That level of clearance," Serana said carefully, "narrows our list to less than a dozen names." "Fewer than that," Varenth murmured. The alarms howled again, sharper this time. A Vox officer's voice cut into the strategium. "Enemy landers breaking atmosphere. Multiple heavy insertions near the Casa-turned bastion. We have warp signatures inside the impact zones." Varenth's hand went to his sword hilt, not out of need, but as a reflex. "Deploy reserves to cast a turn. Full armor columns. Burn the landing zones." "And the traitor?" Serana pressed. His gaze was still fixed on the hololith. "The traitor can wait. The landers cannot." The chamber shook as the first of the enemy's planetary bombardments landed. Deep, concussive strikes that rippled through the very stone of Cadia. Dust sifted down from the strategium's vaulted ceiling. In the brief flicker of emergency lighting, Varenth's eyes caught Serana's. She looked as though she wanted to ask him something. Not about the battle, but about him. She didn't. Instead, she saluted sharply and turned to relay his orders. When she was gone, the voice returned, softer than before. "You can't save them, brother. You never could." Varenth closed his eyes. In the darkness behind them, he saw not Cadia, but 1,000 other worlds burning. He saw the same tide, the same inevitability, and beneath it all, he felt the cold certainty that the traitor was not just a symptom of this war. They were its signal. Somewhere within Cadia's walls, the past was moving against him. The sky was breaking. It did not shatter like glass, but peeled open like the skin of a great wound, spilling the roiling light of the warp across Cadia's stratosphere. From horizon to horizon, reality twisted. Clouds froze mid-motion, their shapes curling into impossible spirals, and the pale sunlight dimmed to a bruised purple. The air itself tasted of copper and ash. Lord Castellan Varenth stood at the top of the bastion of St. Kai, the wind tearing at his crimson cloak, his eyes fixed on the impossible fracture that had split the heavens. He had seen warp storms before. This was different. This was deliberate. From the rents in the sky, things began to emerge. Not ships, not solid matter, but shadows given flesh. Demon forms vast enough to eclipse the sun for moments at a time, their bodies limned with fire and screaming auroras. Some flew on wings that beat against both air and the fabric of reality. Others slithered down beams of impossible light, their eyes like molten suns, their voices a chorus of hunger. Below him, the fortress city of Casa Vortigaunt roared with life and death. Sirens howled from every bastion. Regiments of Cadian shock troops moved in precise formations through the streets. Laser guns at the ready, eyes trained upward. Civilians, those few permitted within the city's walls, were herded toward deep shelter vaults. Above them all, the gun batteries swiveled skyward, their barrels tracking the impossible things descending from the rift. A voice crackled in Varenth's vox bead. "Lord Castellan, this is Captain Kine. Orbital Command confirms we've lost the Iron Edict and pride of Casa. Warp incursions are bypassing void defenses entirely. Impact zones everywhere." Varanth's reply was grim. Seal all gatehouses. Lock down on every casa. We do not wait for them to choose their ground. We make them fight for every stone. Static filled the line for a moment. Then Serana's voice returned, quieter. Understood. But we both know what's coming. Varanth didn't answer. He didn't need to. The first impact came without warning. A thunderclap so vast it shook the foundations of the bastion. Varanth's hands gripped the railing as he saw it. A column of living fire plunging from the tear in the sky, smashing into the outer defenses of Casa Myrak. The shockwave flattened hab blocks and ripped defensive towers from their roots. Even from kilometers away, he could feel the heat on his face. Then came another, and another. In the space of minutes, the outskirts of Cadia were dotted with warp lights, each one a breach point from which something clawed its way into reality. The air was thick with the sound of gunfire and the distant, wordless roars of the newly arrived horrors. Lord Castellan, an aide called from behind him. Casa Myrak's line is breaking. Casa Relden is under direct assault from... The man hesitated, his voice cracking. Entities in the shape of men, but not men. Varanth turned sharply. What do you mean? They wear armor, my lord. Black and gold. The mark of the War Master. The name hit like a weight in the air. The Black Legion had landed. The true war had begun. Within the War Council chamber, the hololithic map flickered under the strain of warp interference. Red markers, enemy contact points, were blooming across the display like a spreading infection. Serana Kine stood at the table's edge, her hands braced against the steel. We can hold the Khazars if we concentrate our forces, she said, her voice low but urgent. If we spread too thin, they'll isolate and crush us one by one. We concentrate, and the gaps will be exploited within hours, countered Colonel Janrek, commander of the 9th. This enemy doesn't fight like orcs or tyrannids. They know the terrain. They know us. We must reinforce every line. They know us, Varanth said slowly, stepping into the chamber. The others fell silent. They have fought us for 10,000 years. Every casa, every trench, every command pattern. They've seen it before. If we defend as we always have, they will dismantle us piece by piece. Janrek's mouth tightened. Then what, my lord? Abandon the outer casas entirely. Varanth's gaze swept across the map. Number we give them ground they think they've taken. We bleed them for every inch. And when they are overconfident, his voice dropped to a cold whisper. We break them in the heart of the city. The city shook again, this time not from impact, but from the heavy, deliberate tread of something immense. Varanth, Serana, and the council moved to the viewport. In the distance, emerging from a pall of warp fire, came the silhouette of a war machine older than Cadia's walls, a titan, but not one of the Collegia Titanica. This one moved with a wrongness that set the teeth on edge, its adamantium armor corroded and twisted. Runes of the dark gods burned into its plating. Its weapons were not mere cannons, but massive, shrieking maws of metal, each one wreathed in warp light. God engine, someone whispered. Not anymore, Varanth said. As they watched, the corrupted titan leveled one of its warp cannons at a fortress bastion. The resulting beam tore reality apart in a perfect line, unmaking matter at the molecular level. The bastion vanished, replaced by a yawning wound in the ground that led straight into the planet's mantle. Pull all artillery to grid Theta 7, Varanth ordered. I want every earthshaker and every missile launcher we have pointed at that thing. Hours bled into each other. As the siege ground forward, every street became a fortress. Every hab block was turned into a redoubt. The Cadians fought with the precision of a people born to war. But the enemy was endless. For every Chaos Marine cut down, another stepped through the warp rift. For every demon banished, 3 more clawed their way into existence. Varanth moved between sectors constantly, his presence rallying men and women on the brink of collapse. He fought alongside them when needed, his power sword crackling through the air, his bolt pistol roaring in sharp, measured bursts. He never tired, never faltered. And yet, in the quiet moments between battles, his thoughts turned inward, to the voice that still whispered from the warp. "Brother, you cannot win this alone." He pushed it away. He had made his choice centuries ago. As night fell, though the fractured sky gave no true darkness, the enemy's assault intensified. Warp flares lit the streets in shades of crimson and sickly green. The air was choked with smoke and the smell of ozone. In the command post of Casa Vortigaunt, Serana approached Varenth with grim news. "They've breached Castra Mirak. Survivors are falling back in disarray. We can't hold both Myrak and Relden. One has to fall." Varenth studied her for a long moment. "Myrak." She nodded without argument, but he could see the question in her eyes. "Why there?" "Because," Varenth thought, "it is where the trap will be sprung." By dawn, if dawn it could be called, Castra Mirak was ash and ruin. But the enemy had paid for it in oceans of blood. Their advance slowed, their formations drawn inward toward the heart of Cadia's defenses, just as Varenth had planned. But as he stood on the walls of Vortigaunt, watching the burning remains of Myrak, he felt it, a shift in the air, a new presence in the warp, vast and oppressive, like the hand of a god pressing down upon the planet. And then he heard it, faint at first, then swelling until it was a voice that filled the sky. "Varenth, it has been too long." The light of the dying star bled through the shattered vaults of the Imperial Hall, painting the marble floor in hues of crimson and gold. The banners of the Celestial Dominion, once the proud sigils of unity, hung in tatters, their threads pulled loose by months of neglect and the acrid winds that swept through broken windows. Silence had become the Empire's truest anthem, a suffocating stillness that clung to every shadowed corridor. At the center of this hollow grandeur stood Lord Regent Kael Varanis, clad not in the ceremonial white and gold of his office, but in the darkened battle plate of his youth. Its surface bore the scars of centuries, each gouge a memory, each burn a debt yet unpaid. His eyes, cold and rimmed with sleeplessness, swept over the council chamber where his fate, and that of the Empire, would soon be sealed. The Great Council had been summoned, though its ranks were thinned beyond recognition. Some lords had perished in the endless border wars, others had defected to the Ascendancy, and still more had simply vanished, swallowed by the tide of chaos now lapping at the heart of the Dominion. Only 9 of the original 31 high seats were occupied. The air was tense. Seated at the far end was Archon Seralia Drevin, the Dominion's spy master, draped in the silver-grey silks of her office. Her veiled face betrayed nothing, though her gloved fingers tapped an irregular rhythm on the armrest, a sign, Kyle knew, of her irritation. Beside her sat Lord Admiral Veric Halden, his once pristine uniform stained with engine oil and the faint scent of ozone from days spent aboard the Eternal Spear, the last functioning dreadnought in the fleet. His eyes were bloodshot. Exhaustion and bitterness warred within him. They were all here for one purpose: to decide whether the Dominion would stand, kneel, or burn. The oath brought to question, Kael's voice broke the silence. The Ascendancy demands our surrender by the next orbital cycle. They offer terms, lenient ones for now. Dissolution of our fleets, ceding of the core trade routes, and swearing fealty to their eternal throne. In exchange, they promise stability, peace. The word hung in the air like poison. Lord Admiral Holden slammed a gauntleted fist onto the table. Peace. There is no peace in chains, Regent. The Ascendancy's promises are dust. I've seen their pacified worlds, entire cultures stripped bare, languages forbidden, histories rewritten to serve their glory. Seralia's tone was calm, but her words cut like glass. And yet, Admiral, without surrender, we face extinction. Our fleets are crippled, our supply lines severed. The frontier has fallen. Our people starve, while our enemies grow fat on our failures. Halden snarled, but Kyle raised a hand to silence them both. We swore the oath of dominion to the people, to defend them, to preserve their lives, even at the cost of our pride. That oath is sacred. But now, that same oath demands we ask, is survival without freedom still service or betrayal? Shadows of the past. For a moment, no one spoke. The chamber seemed to tighten around them. Kael's mind drifted, unbidden, to the day he first swore the oath. He had been young then, a soldier forged in the fires of the Archon Crusades, his faith in the Dominion unshakable. The Emperor himself had placed the blade in his hands, the steel still warm from the forge, and charged him with guarding the Empire's light against the encroaching dark. But that light had dimmed, and Kael had dimmed with it. He thought of High Empress Elira, her voice a mixture of warmth and steel, her counsel both a comfort and a challenge. She had been the heart of the Dominion until the war took her from him, stolen by a traitor's hand on the night of the Crimson Eclipse. Kael had never found the assassin. He had vowed to keep her vision alive. Yet now, with the Empire fractured and its enemies circling, he wondered if her dream had already died, and he had simply been too stubborn to see it. The betrayer in the room. It was Lord Magistrate Calvos Wren who shattered the silence. His voice was smooth, almost too smooth. My regent, perhaps the decision need not be framed as surrender or defiance. The Ascendancy seeks only obedience in form, not in heart. We could appear to kneel while preparing to rise again when the time is right. Holden scoffed. And you think they'll allow us to keep the means to rise? You think they'll give us time? They'll gut our fleets, dismantle our academies, and station their overseers in every province. Calvos smiled faintly, a serpent's smile. Perhaps, but perhaps, they can be persuaded otherwise. Gold and secrets sway more thrones than swords ever have. Kyle studied him. There was something in the magistrate's gaze, a flicker of calculation that did not belong to a loyal servant of the Dominion. Seralia caught it too, her head tilted ever so slightly, her gloved hand stilling its restless tapping. "Tell me, Calvos," she said, her voice soft as silk. "How much has the Ascendancy already paid you for this counsel?" The magistrate's composure faltered for the briefest of moments. It was enough. The vote. The argument dragged into the long hours of the night. Voices rose, accusations flew, and the heavy scent of desperation filled the hall. In the end, they voted. 4 for surrender. 4 for defiance. Kyle's was the deciding voice. The weight of it pressed on him like a mountain. His decision would not only shape the future of the Dominion, but decide whether the oath he had sworn all those centuries ago would be honored or broken. He closed his eyes. He saw the faces of the soldiers who had died for the Empire. the hollow eyes of starving children in the outer provinces, the blood-soaked steps of the Empress's throne on the night she was murdered. When he spoke, his voice was steady. We do not kneel. The shattering. The words had barely left his lips when Seralia rose from her seat. Then understand this, Regent. The ascendancy will come for us with all the fury of the stars, and when they do, I will not die for your pride. My agents will vanish into the void before that day arrives. Holden stood, slamming his fist to his chest in salute. Then we fight, to the last ship, to the last soldier, to the last breath. Calvos simply smiled. As you wish, my regent. But I suspect the ascendancy already knows of your decision, and even now they are moving to act. And then, without another word, he turned and walked from the hall. The sound of his retreating steps echoed like a death knell. The first blow. Within hours, Kyle's fears were realized. Reports flooded in. Ascendancy fleets breaching the outer defense grids. Traitor lords opening the gates of their worlds without a fight. Entire battalions vanishing into defection or desertion. The Eternal Spear was launched into orbit, its engines burning bright against the black. Halden commanded it personally, vowing to hold the line at the Talric Gate. Seralia disappeared, as promised, taking with her half the Dominion's intelligence network. Kyle remained in the capital, rallying what forces he could, but he knew, in the marrow of his bones, that the shattered oath had begun its final verse. The last light. On the eve of the enemy's arrival, Kyle walked alone through the silent halls of the palace. The stars beyond the broken windows seemed colder now, more distant. He paused before the great statue of the Empress, her face carved in marble, her hand outstretched as if still guiding the empire she had loved. I kept my word, Illyra, he whispered. I did not kneel, but I do not know if it was the right choice. Somewhere deep within the palace, the alarms began to wail. The enemy had breached the outer ring. Kyle turned from the statue and walked toward the sound. The shattered oath would be written in fire, and he would see it through to the end. The throne room of Vadris Prime was not as it had been in the days of triumph. Once it had been a cathedral of authority, vast arches of black steel rising like the ribs of some long-dead titan, walls inlaid with molten gold sigils, and the air heavy with the scent of burning myrrh and sanctified oils. Now the great chamber lay cracked and bleeding, with light from the outside, its once perfect dome fractured by orbital bombardment. Through the breaks, one could glimpse the black void, studded with the burning wrecks of ships that had once formed the proud Imperial Armada. The banners of the Celestarch dynasty hung in tatters, their crimson and silver now dulled to shades of ash. Emperor Caelan IV sat hunched upon the throne of oracles, his armored hand clenching the pommel of the ceremonial sword across his knees. His gaze was fixed on the floor, where centuries-old mosaics depicting the empire's founding had been shattered by falling masonry. Around him, the murmurs of the court had faded. Most of the high lords and councillors had abandoned the capital days ago, fleeing to loyalist enclaves or surrendering to the rebellion. Only a few remained, not out of loyalty, but because there was nowhere left to run. The heavy footfalls of the Lord Protector broke the silence. Marshal Varen approached the dais, helm tucked under one arm, the faint glow of his augmetic eye cutting through the gloom. "My Emperor," Varen said, his voice carrying the weight of both duty and dread. "The seventh gate has fallen. The rebels marched directly for the citadel. The outer defense grid has been sabotaged." Caelan did not lift his gaze. "And the legions?" "Scattered," Varen replied grimly. The 9th and 12th legions are dead or in retreat. The 3rd holds the lower city, but won't last till nightfall. The rebel commander fights under the Black Sun banner. There is no mistaking her identity. The Emperor's grip tightened on the sword. Erindra. The name hung between them like a curse. Erindra, the once favoured heir of the imperial bloodline, cast into exile for treachery. Her rebellion had begun in whispers, gathering dissidents from the fringe worlds, outcasts, disenfranchised nobles, entire planetary militias sickened by the corruption of Kaelin's court. What had begun as scattered insurgency had become a war machine, a tide of steel and fire sweeping away centuries of imperial dominion. She was not merely here to claim the throne. She meant to erase the dynasty's very memory. As the echoes of the marshal's words faded, another figure emerged from the shadowed alcove. It was High Seer Malthus, his robes trailing threads of starlight, his withered hands clutching the scepter of veils. His face, half hidden by an obsidian mask, was unreadable. The stars foretell no victory here, Malthus murmured, his voice like parchment tearing. The fall was sealed the day the first covenant was broken. There will be no salvation for the bloodline, only the ashes of legacy. Varen turned sharply to him. You speak treason in the Emperor's presence. I speak truth, the seer said coldly. Truth does not serve loyalty. It serves the inevitable. Kaelin's voice cut through their exchange, low but steady. Then the inevitable shall find me here, upon the throne of my ancestors. If my dynasty must end, it will end with my blood soaking this stone. Outside, the city screamed. The bombardment had ceased. The rebels were close enough for their war drums to be heard, a deep, resonant thunder that made the walls shiver. Fires choked the avenues, and the air carried the metallic tang of ozone and death. Varen knelt before the Emperor. If you fight, I fight, but give the order for the civilians to be evacuated through the undercity tunnels. Let at least the people survive. Kaelin gave a bitter smile. And who will feed them when the rebels seize our grain worlds? Who will protect them when Erindra's justice falls upon those who once wore my sigil? No, Marshal. There is no mercy left in this war. The seer turned, his empty eyes seeming to pierce the stone walls themselves. She comes. The great gates of the throne room burst inward with a roar, the impact shattering the final vestiges of imperial dignity. In strode the rebels, their armor matte black, their visors glowing crimson. And at their head, tall and unyielding, was Erindra herself. Her armor was forged from void steel, black as the space between galaxies, engraved with the runes of victory taken from conquered worlds. Her hair, once the same golden hue as Kaelin's, was bound in a warrior's braid streaked with silver. Her eyes burned with cold purpose. The two siblings faced one another in silence, the weight of decades pressing between them. You should have abdicated when the signs were clear, Erindra said, her voice neither cruel nor soft, merely final. I gave you every chance. Kaelin rose slowly from the throne, the ceremonial sword whispering free of its sheath. And I gave you a place at my side. I gave you the Empire's heart. You gave me chains, she replied, and I broke them. The clash was swift and merciless. Kaelin fought with the desperation of a dying lion, every strike echoing the fury of 1,000 battles fought in his youth. Erindra met him with precision and inevitability, her blade a black arc of death. Around them, loyalists and rebels clashed in the shattered hall, the clash of steel drowning out the groans of the dying. Marshal Varen cut down 2 rebel soldiers, before a spear took him through the chest. He collapsed with a snarl, eyes still fixed on the Emperor. High Seer Malthus stood unmoving, his gaze locked not on the battle, but on something beyond mortal sight. Kaelin's strength began to fade. A cut opened across his side. Blood darkened his robes. Still, he pressed on, driving Arindra back toward the steps of the dais. "You will not destroy what our forebears built," he roared. "I will," she said, "because they built it on lies." The end came with a single, clean strike. Arindra's blade pierced her brother's chest, sliding through the ancient sigils engraved into his armor. He gasped once, eyes wide with disbelief, before his knees buckled. She lowered him to the ground almost gently, the way one might set aside a broken relic. The Emperor's last breath misted the air between them. "Then, take it, sister," and he was still. Arindra rose, turning her gaze upon the throne of oracles. For a long moment, she did not move. Then, slowly, she ascended the steps and placed herself upon the seat. The throne's ancient machinery hummed faintly as it acknowledged her, the runes shifting from crimson to black. Malthus stepped forward, bowing his head. "The old order is ended. What will you make of the new?" Arindra's eyes swept across the ruin of the chamber, the corpses of friend and foe alike. "Something that will last," she said, "even if it must be built from the bones of gods." And outside, the war drums fell silent. The first dawn after the fall of Vedris Prime rose blood-red. Smoke coiled through the ruined spires, and the once bright banners of the Shelestark dynasty lay trampled in the streets, their silken threads soaked in rain and blood. The capital had been silent in the hours after Emperor Caelin's death, as though the city itself was holding its breath. Now the silence had broken, not with cries of joy or mourning, but with the slow, grinding march of Irindra's new regime. The citadel was still littered with the corpses of the final battle. Irindra walked its shattered halls alone, her void steel armor stripped away, replaced by a plain black cloak. Her boots echoed against the cracked marble, and for the first time since seizing the throne, she allowed herself to feel the weight of what she had done. She had won, and yet the victory tasted like cold ash. In the great hall, the throne of oracles loomed before her. Its ancient machinery still whispered in its strange, otherworldly language, the runes along its surface now etched in black flame light. She had sat upon it once already, the act sealing her rule in the eyes of those who feared her blade more than they loved her cause. But this time she stood before it, staring at the seat that had claimed the sanity and soul of every ruler before her. "You have inherited the empire you wanted," a voice murmured. She turned to see Malthus, the High Seer, gliding from the shadows. His obsidian mask reflected her pale face back at her. "I have inherited a carcass," she replied. "It will take years to scrape away the rot." "Rot has roots," Malthus said softly. "Some run deeper than empires." Council was convened at midday. The surviving High Lords, most of them trembling in their ceremonial robes, gathered around the scorched obsidian table in the council chamber. Some had bent the knee willingly. Others had been dragged here under armed escort. Irindra took her place at the head of the table. She wore no crown. "You are here because the old order is dead," she began, her voice flat. "The Celestark bloodline is ended. The corruption that has bled our worlds dry will end with it. From this day, the throne belongs to no single dynasty. Power will be earned, not inherited." Lord Vethrin, a spindly figure with eyes like frost, leaned forward. And yet you sit where your brother sat, in the hall your forebears built. You command the armies. Tell me, Arindra, is this not a new crown on an old head? Her gaze pinned him like a blade point. You mistake the symbol for the power it once held. The throne is a tool, and I will wield it until the new order is strong enough to stand without me. There were murmurs at the table, some skeptical, some calculating. None dared openly defy her. Outside the council chambers, Marshal Varen's successor awaited. A young officer named Sir Kyle, his armor still bearing the scorch marks of the siege, saluted her stiffly. "Report," she ordered. "Outer districts are secured," Kyle said. "Resistance pockets are scattered. We've begun distributing grain to the lower tiers. The people are watching, waiting to see what kind of ruler you will be. And the loyalist enclaves in the outer rim, still holding. Some have fled into deep void space. There are whispers of Kaelin's surviving bloodline." Arindra's jaw tightened. "Find them, not to kill them, not yet. But I will not have ghosts haunting my reign." That night, she walked the lower tiers of the city without guards. The streets were a maze of scorched ruins and half-collapsed habs. Refugees huddled under makeshift shelters. Children with hollow eyes stared at her from alleys. An old woman spat as she passed. "Murderer." Arindra did not respond. She moved on, but the word followed her like a shadow. 3 days later, emissaries from the Rim worlds arrived. They were not allies yet, but their fleets had stayed neutral during the rebellion, waiting to see who would emerge from the bloodshed. Their leader, Chancellor Riven, met Arindra in the war room. "You ask for alliance," he said, pouring himself a glass of bitterroot wine. "What do you offer?" "Stability," she answered. "Trade rights and protection from the raider fleets that will come now that Kaelin's armadas are gone." Riven studied her for a long moment. "And what of the prophecy that the one who takes the throne of oracles will die within 7 years, their name cursed for 1,000? Arindra allowed herself a small, humorless smile. "Then I have 7 years to make it worth the curse." In the weeks that followed, her reforms began, swift, brutal, and uncompromising. The old noble houses were stripped of their hereditary rights. Grain stores were seized from hoarders and redistributed under military supervision. The temples that had once preached the divine right of the Shelestarks were forced to open their vaults to feed the starving. The people called her the Black Regent. Some spat the title as an insult. Others whispered it with hope. But shadows grew. Reports came of a surviving Celestarch prince, a boy of 12, hidden somewhere in the storm-racked world of Aetheris. Loyalist warbands rallied around the rumor, and already assassins had begun to slip into the capital. Malthus warned her one night as they stood on the balcony overlooking the shattered city. "You cannot hold a crown in one hand and a sword in the other forever. The bloodline's shadow will not fade while any ember remains." "I know," she said, "but I will burn the shadow before I let it grow." The seer tilted his head. "And when you have burned it all, what will remain of you?" Arindra did not answer. The turning point came with the arrival of the Talon's Spear, a warship bearing the black sun of her own rebellion. Its commander, once her fiercest ally, knelt before her throne. "My regent," he said, "the outer colonies are restless. They fought for your cause, but they see little difference between your rule and Kaelin's. They demand representation in the High Council. or they will take it with force. Arindra's hands clenched at her sides. Tell them they have it, but remind them who put me on this throne. When he had gone, Malthus stepped forward from the shadows once again. You give them a voice now. One day they may use it to sing your downfall. Then I will teach them to sing in harmony, she replied. And so the first seeds of the new order were planted in soil soaked with blood. The empire, no longer the Celestark Empire, but the Concord of Ashes, began to take shape. Yet Arindra knew the galaxy was not done testing her. In the far reaches, warlords gathered strength. In the deep void, the old enemies of the dynasty stirred, sensing weakness. And somewhere, a boy with the blood of Kaelin IV in his veins learned to wield a blade. The game was not over. It had only just begun. The storms of Atheris were eternal. They were not gentle rains or tempests that came and went. They were oceans of black thunderclouds that clawed at the surface of the world with lightning sharp enough to shatter mountains. Beneath that endless fury lay a planet of jagged cliffs, abyssal seas, and sprawling fortress cities built into the bones of ancient craters. It was here that the last living heir of the Celestark bloodline drew breath. The boy's name was Rylan. At 12 years old, he had the thin, hungry look of someone born into exile. Yet there was a sharpness in his eyes that reminded those who guarded him of the man who had once ruled the galaxy. His caretakers, a circle of loyalist knights, and a single grim tutor named Althar Vane, never let him forget his heritage. You are not a refugee, Althar would say, as the lightning split the sky outside their mountain keep. You are the emperor in exile. Every breath you take is an act of defiance. Rylan listened, and he remembered. Far across the void, in the capital of the Concord of Ashes, Arindra received her first report confirming the Abiyan boy's existence. He's under the protection of House Vane, Zerkael told her, laying the data slate on the obsidian table in the war room. They've fortified themselves in the Skyfast Keep on Atheris. That storm cover makes orbital assault near impossible without catastrophic losses. Arindra studied the holomap. Atheris glowed like a wound on the galactic chart. Assassination? She asked. Kael hesitated. It could be done. But if the loyalists suspect your hand, you'll make him a martyr. She said nothing, but in her mind she heard Malthus's voice. The bloodline's shadow will not fade while any ember remains. Meanwhile, on Atheris, the loyalist cause began to stir in earnest. In hidden halls lit by storm lamps, knights in battered voidplate swore oaths before the boy. Rylan stood on a stone dais, his small hands clenched at his sides, his voice steady as he repeated the words Althar had taught him. I will reclaim what was stolen. I will honor the dead. I will take the throne not as heir, but as avenger. The knights roared their approval. Back in the capital, the Concord was fracturing before it could fully form. The Rimworlds demanded more autonomy. The former noble houses, stripped of their titles, began financing riots in the lower tiers. Grain convoys were being intercepted in the outer systems by warbands claiming loyalty to the true bloodline. Arindra convened her council. If the boy survives another year, half the Concord will rally to him, said Lord Vethrin, now a reluctant but useful advisor. Your reforms will mean nothing if the galaxy believes it has a rightful ruler waiting in the wings. And yet, killing him outright could unite them faster, Arindra replied. We need another way. Malthus, silent until now, stepped forward. Bring him to you, not as prisoner, but as ward. Raise him in your court. Make him your ally, or your weapon. Arindra looked at him sharply. You believe he could be turned? All children can be shaped, Malthus said softly. On Etheris, Ryland's training grew harsher. Althar taught him to wield the twin-edged blade of the Celestarch Guard, a weapon too heavy for his thin arms, but one he refused to put down. Each strike was punctuated by lightning outside, each parry by the deep growl of thunder. You cannot merely hold a blade, Althar told him. You must become the storm that drives it. By the time he could lift the sword without trembling, the Loyalists began preparing ships, not for battle, but for a journey to gather allies. Rumors spoke of fleets hiding in the nebulae beyond the rim, captains who had served Kaelin and sworn to his bloodline. The first clash came not in the void, but in the trade corridors. Arindra's envoys to the Etheris system vanished, their ships found drifting, crews slain with the precision of professional soldiers. In response, she dispatched Sir Kael at the head of a covert strike team. Their mission was not to kill, but to breach the Loyalist defenses and extract the boy. The operation failed before it began. Kael returned alone, armor shattered, face scarred by plasma fire. They knew we were coming, he told her, voice raw. It was as if they could read our movements before we made them. Arindra's eyes narrowed. A spy in the Concord, then, or something worse. In the following weeks, the storms of Etheris seemed to bleed into the rest of the galaxy. Pirate fleets emboldened by the Loyalist movement struck deeper into Concord territory. Grain riots in the capital turned violent, forcing Arindra to deploy troops in her own streets. Still, she refused to give the order for Ryland's death. You hesitate, Malthus observed one night as they stood on the same balcony where they had once watched the city burn. I choose my moment, she replied. He regarded her in silence for a time. Moments have a way of choosing themselves. On Etheris, the boy's legend grew. Stories spread of a storm-born heir who could walk unharmed through lightning, who could see the path of enemy blades before they struck. None of it was true, not yet, but the myth was more dangerous than the child. One night, as he stood in the high hall of Skyfast Keep, Rylan asked Althar, if I am to be emperor, why do we hide? Because, Althar said, a storm does not begin at full strength. It gathers, and when it breaks everything. The break came sooner than either side expected. A Loyalist fleet struck deep into Concord space, seizing the shipyards of Vadris Minor. From there, they could build enough warships to challenge even the Black Regent's armadas. Arindra knew she had to act, not with assassins, but with an army. The war for Etheris had begun. Arindra herself led the campaign. Her fleet descended into the storm-racked orbit, its void shields straining against the relentless lightning. Dropships plunged through the maelstrom, disgorging troops into the jagged highlands. The Loyalists fought like zealots, their armor bearing the gold sunburst of the Celestarch line. In the chaos, Arindra broke through to the gates of Skyfast Keep. The fortress loomed above her, its battlements lit by stormfire. She cut her way through the defenders, her black cloak torn by wind and rain. At the great doors, she found herself face to face with Rylan. He was smaller than she expected, the boy's armor too large for his frame, but his eyes, Kaelin's eyes, burned with a steady defiance. You killed my father, he said. I killed an emperor who had lost his empire, she answered. But you still have a choice. I have no choice, Ryland said, raising his blade. I have a destiny. They fought, though it was not truly a duel. He was too young, too untested. She was a warrior forged in fire. Within moments, she had disarmed him, the tip of her blade resting at his throat. The loyalist knights who remained alive shouted for her death, but Arindra did not strike. Instead, she lowered her sword. Come with me. Live. Learn. See the truth of the galaxy before you decide to rule it. Rylan spat at her boots. I will never serve you. Perhaps not, she said, signaling her troops, but you will come all the same. By the time the storms cleared enough for her fleet to depart, Skyfast Keep was a ruin. The loyalist cause had not been destroyed, only driven deeper into shadow. But the boy was gone, taken aboard the Black Throne flagship under Arindra's personal watch. Malthus met her in the docking bay. You have the ember, he said. Now we will see if it burns for you or against you. Arindra looked toward the small figure standing at the far end of the hangar, staring out at the storm-racked world below. It will burn, she said, and I will decide where. The corridors of the Concord's citadel were colder than the void outside. Rylan walked them with cautious steps, his armor still oversized and his hands clenched tight against the unfamiliar weight of chains. The Black Throne's flagship was a cathedral of power and silence. Halls of burnished steel, ceilings vaulted with ancient engravings, and echoes that swallowed whispered fears whole. Here, the boy who once dreamed of vengeance was now a prisoner. Arindra watched from her chamber, a fortress of glass and obsidian overlooking the city ruins below. The boy's capture was only the first move in a larger game. She summoned Malthus to her side. We have him, but what now? The child is no longer a weapon. He is a pawn in the court's endless game. Malthus's voice was as dry as dust. A pawn can become a queen, if played well. You must forge him anew. His loyalty must be earned, his hatred redirected. Or he becomes my undoing. Indeed. Rylan was thrust into a world that felt like a dream or a nightmare. Lords and ladies of the Concord circled him like vultures, their smiles thin and their eyes sharp. The Black Regent's court was a crucible of whispered threats, secret deals, and veiled promises. The boy's only refuge was Althar Vane, now bound to the Concord by oath and circumstance. The old tutor never left his side, a grim shadow amidst the glittering court. You must learn their language, Althar said one evening, voice low as the city's ever-present storm rumbled in the distance. The language of power is not steel, but words, and the sharpest blade hides behind the softest tongue. Rylan nodded, but inside, the fire of rebellion burned fiercely. Every word he spoke was measured, every smile forced. He watched and waited for the moment to strike, yet that moment never came. The court's intrigue deepened when Arindra introduced a new figure, Lady Sierra Valen, Mistress of Shadows. She was a woman both feared and revered, draped in robes woven from void mist and adorned with chains of dark crystal. Her eyes were pools of ancient night, and her smile was a blade sharper than any sword. Lady Sierra became Rylan's tutor in the arts of manipulation, her lessons harsh and unyielding. You are a symbol, she told him, her voice like velvet wrapped around steel. But symbols are fragile. You must become something more. Shadow, a whisper, a force unseen but felt. Rylan learned quickly, absorbing her teachings with a hunger born of desperation. Meanwhile, the galaxy beyond the citadel seethed with unrest. The loyalist enclaves had not vanished. They gathered strength in secret, emboldened by Ryland's presence in the Concord. Skirmishes erupted on border worlds. Fleets clashed in the void, and whispers of rebellion stirred in the lower tiers of the capital. Irindra's grip was firm, but the cracks beneath her grew wider each day. One evening, Malthus appeared unannounced in Ryland's quarters. His obsidian mask reflected the dim candlelight, eyes unreadable. "You walk a dangerous path, boy," he said softly, "between loyalty and hatred, power and submission. Choose carefully, for every step shapes your soul." Ryland met his gaze, defiance flaring. "I am not your pawn." "No," Malthus said, "but you may become the greatest force the Concord has ever seen, or its final ruin." Ryland's time in the court was a crucible. He was praised for his grace before the nobles, scorned for his youth, and plotted against by those who feared the return of the Celestark line. Every smile hid a dagger, every embrace a trap. Yet beneath the polished veneer, the boy's resolve hardened. He was no longer the exiled heir. He was a survivor. Months passed. Ryland's lessons with Lady Sierra grew darker. She taught him to weave shadows with words, to silence enemies without bloodshed, and to turn whispers into weapons. "Your enemy is not just those who wield swords," she told him once, "but those who command loyalty with promises and lies." One night, under her guidance, Ryland orchestrated his first court coup, the removal of a rival lord who had spoken openly against the Black Regent. The man vanished without trace, his estates quietly absorbed into the Concord. Irindra observed these changes from her throne. She saw the boy transform from a reckless child into a cunning player of the game. Yet there were moments when she glimpsed the old fire, flashes of the storm-born heir who refused to kneel. During a rare meeting, she confronted him directly. "Ryland," she said, voice low, "you could be my heir, or my executioner. The choice is yours." He met her gaze steadily. "I will decide my own fate. And if that fate is your destruction, then I will burn with it." The tension between them was a quiet war. Allies whispered of rebellion, enemies watched and waited. The Concord's foundation shook beneath the weight of secrets and lies. In the silent hours of the night, Ryland would often stand at the balcony, staring out over the shattered city below, wondering if the storm would ever break, and on which side he would stand when it did. The Forge of Shadows was still burning, and from its flames, a new destiny was being forged. The citadel never truly slept. Even in the depths of night, the flicker of candlelight could be seen behind stained glass windows, and hushed voices wove webs of secrets through the labyrinthine halls. In the black heart of the Concord, trust was a currency more precious and far rarer than gold. Irindra moved through these shadows like a spectre, her senses sharpened by months of rule and battle. Each smile she received was weighed for hidden daggers, each bow a mask for treachery. Her grip on the Concord was firm but fragile, and she knew the fault lines were spreading faster than she could seal them. It was in the council chamber that the first rupture surfaced. Lord Vethrin, once a loyal advisor, now wore a veneer of icy calculation. His pale eyes glittered with ambition as he leaned forward, voice low and steady. "My regent, the Concord's unity is at risk. Factions grow bold. The Rimworld governors question your reforms and whisper of secession. Even within your own court, loyalty frays." Irindra's gaze was sharp. "What do you propose?" "A council of peers," Vethrin replied. "A shared rule to bind the factions together." Malthus stepped forward, voice like cracked parchment. A council is a council of knives. You invite betrayal to dine at your table. Arindra remained silent, weighing their words. The room seemed to close around her, thick with unspoken threats. Of that night, the whispers began. In the lower tiers, rumors spread like wildfire. The Black Regent's reign was weakening. The boy Rylan plotted in the shadows. The ancient bloodline would rise again. These were not idle words, but the echo of deeper unrest. Within her own chambers, Arindra received a message cloaked in secrecy. A veiled figure slipped a data slate into her hand, the intercepted communications of a faction within the Concord conspiring to overthrow her. Among the conspirators was a name she had once trusted, Lady Sira Valen. Betrayal cut deeper than any blade. Arindra summoned Malthus and Sir Kyle to the war room. The data slate glowed ominously between them, revealing coded conversations, secret meetings, and plans to assassinate the regent. "Why would Sira turn against us?" Kyle asked, anger rough in his voice. Malthus's mask seemed to deepen in shadow. Power is a hunger that knows no loyalty. She teaches the boy to manipulate, yet her ambitions may outstrip even his. Arindra's mind raced. To confront Lady Sira would risk exposing Rylan, whose allegiance was still uncertain. Yet allowing the conspiracy to fester meant death by another's hand. In the corridors of power, the game twisted further. Lady Sira moved with serpentine grace, attending court functions with a smile as cold as winter's bite. To the nobles, she was a pillar of strength. To Arindra, a venomous shadow. Meanwhile, Rylan wrestled with his own demons. The lessons of manipulation weighed on him heavily, the whispers of loyalty and ambition tearing at his young heart. One evening, as he sat alone in the moonlit gardens, Lady Sira approached, her voice a soft caress. "Power is not given, boy," she said. "It is taken, and those who hesitate are crushed." He looked up, conflicted. "And what if I refuse?" She smiled, a serpent uncoiling. "Refusal is the first step to ruin." The tension between pupil and mentor grew until it snapped. During a private audience, Rylan confronted Lady Sira. "You seek to use me as a pawn in your game. I will not be controlled." Her eyes darkened. "You are naive. The court will devour you if you show weakness. Learn to be the predator or be prey." Their words were daggers, each strike leaving unseen scars. Meanwhile, the conspiracy deepened. Lord Vethrin covertly met with dissident nobles, promising power in exchange for allegiance. The lower tiers burned with riots, stoked by agitators claiming to be agents of the true bloodline. Arindra's forces crushed the uprisings ruthlessly, but every victory cost her legitimacy among the people. Malthus warned her in the dead of night, "You fight shadows that wear your own face. The greatest betrayals come from within." Arindra decided to act. She summoned Lady Sira to the citadel's inner sanctum. The room was bathed in pale starlight, a silence thick enough to suffocate. "You have betrayed my trust," Arindra said, voice calm but icy. "Why?" Sira's smile was thin. "Because loyalty is the weakest chain. I serve the future, not the past. The Concord must evolve, or it will perish. By murder, by any means necessary." The tension cracked like lightning. Before the confrontation could escalate, alarms blared. The council chamber was under attack. Vethrin's faction had moved to seize power by force. Armed loyalists stormed the halls, their battle cries echoing off ancient stone. Arindra and her guards fought fiercely, but the betrayal was deep, and the battle spilled through the corridors like wildfire. Rylan, caught between factions, was forced to choose. He found himself face to face with Lady Sierra amid the chaos. "Join me," she urged. "Together, we can claim the Concord." Rylan hesitated. The lessons, the whispers, the fire inside him, all collided. "I will forge my own path," he said, stepping back. Her eyes flashed with fury. "Then you will burn alone." So the fight ended with the Concord in ruins. Vethrin and his conspirators were crushed or fled into hiding. The cost was high. The city was scarred, the people fearful, and trust shattered. Erindra, bloodied but unbowed, sat once more upon the throne of oracles, the weight of her crown heavier than ever. Malthus stood beside her, his voice a somber echo. "In betrayal's wake, only the strongest survive, but even the strongest may find their shadows waiting." As the fires died and silence reclaimed the citadel, Erindra and Rylan both understood that the war was no longer just for power. It was a battle for the very soul of the Concord. The veils of betrayal had been lifted, revealing a darkness that threatened to consume them all. The citadel was quiet again, but the silence was not peace. It was the fragile stillness after a storm, pregnant with menace and unspoken fear. Erindra sat alone in her chamber, the weight of the throne of oracles pressing down like a mountain. She stared into the flickering flames of the braziers, seeking answers in their restless dance, but found only questions. The betrayal had left scars deeper than the surface wounds of the Concord. Rylan remained a prisoner in the same fortress that had once sheltered him, but captivity was a hollow word. The boy moved freely now, a shadow among the court, cloaked in whispered rumors and growing legend. His lessons in manipulation had borne fruit, but the path before him was tangled with uncertainty. His mind was a battlefield. Loyalty wrestled with vengeance. Hope clashed with despair. One night, as the citadel's towers reached into a sky bruised with dying stars, Rylan stood by the window of his chambers, gazing out at the shattered city below. The storm clouds gathered once more, mirroring the turmoil within his soul. Althar Vane appeared quietly behind him, the weight of years etched into his lined face. "You carry the weight of the bloodline," the old tutor said softly, "but it is not the blood that defines you. It is the choices you make." Rylan's voice was barely a whisper. "I do not know what my choices are anymore." Althar's gaze was steady. "Then you must find the strength to decide, not from anger or fear, but from who you truly are." Meanwhile, Erindra sought counsel from Malthus in the depths of the citadel's labyrinthine archives. The seer's presence was a constant shadow, his obsidian mask reflecting flickering candlelight. "The boy grows in darkness," Malthus murmured. "He is both mirror and enemy. His mind is a battlefield as much as his body." Erindra's eyes were hard. "And I must be the shield that breaks him, or the sword that kills him." Malthus's voice was grave. "Or the hand that guides him. You must decide which." Tensions in the court tightened like a noose. Lady Sierra, though weakened by the failed coup, remained a potent force, her network of spies and assassins still active. She watched Rylan with a mixture of contempt and calculation, waiting for the moment to strike. Rylan himself had begun to question her teachings. The shadows she urged him to wield felt cold and consuming. One night, alone in the gardens of the citadel, Rylan confronted Lady Sierra. "I will not be your puppet," he declared, voice trembling with newfound resolve. Her smile was a blade. "Puppets are useful, but kings must dance on the edge of the blade, lest they fall." He stepped back, the weight of choice heavy on his shoulders. Outside, the galaxy's unrest simmered. Skirmishes flared on border worlds. The Loyalists' resolve hardened by the boy's growing legend. The Rimworld governors pressed for more autonomy, their fleets poised like coiled serpents ready to strike. Arindra tightened her hold, deploying loyal forces to quell uprisings. Yet each victory came at a cost. Loyalty frayed, suspicion deepened. The psychological warfare between Arindra and Rylan reached new heights when she summoned him to a private audience in the Hall of Echoes, a chamber where whispered words carried weight beyond their sound. She spoke not as a conqueror, but as a woman burdened by the crown. "Rylan," she said quietly, "you stand at a crossroads. Your blood calls for vengeance, but the galaxy calls for peace. You can burn it all down, or build something new." He met her gaze, eyes burning with youthful fire and ancient sorrow. "Peace is a lie told by those who fear power," he replied. "But I do not want to be like you." "Then tell me what you want." Ryland's silence was a thunderclap. Their conversation left both shaken, each wrestling with the fragile line between hope and destruction. In the days that followed, a new threat emerged, not from outside, but within. A secret faction, loyal to the old Celestarch dynasty, emboldened by the unrest, began mobilizing in the shadows. Their agents infiltrated the Concord's ranks, sowing discord, spreading lies, and preparing for a final bid to reclaim the throne. Arindra's spies uncovered their plans too late. The faction's attack was swift and brutal. Outposts fell, supply lines were severed, and the Concord's fragile unity threatened to shatter completely. Arindra's forces fought desperately to hold the line, but betrayal and exhaustion weighed heavily. Amid the chaos, Rylan faced his own trial, a choice to side with the old dynasty or carve his own path in the storm. He stood in the ruins of a captured fortress, the ghosts of fallen soldiers whispering on the wind. "I am not my father," he vowed aloud. "I will not be a puppet of the past." But the question lingered. How could he rebuild when the world around him was collapsing? The chapter closed with Arindra and Rylan, standing on opposite sides of a widening chasm, each powerful, each vulnerable, each carrying the fate of the Concord on their shoulders. The storm had not passed. It was only growing. The galaxy's dark veins pulsed with war. Beyond the fractured walls of the Concord, the loyalist enclaves had ignited the fires of rebellion anew. Fleets clashed amidst the swirling nebulae. Star systems burned in quiet carnage, and the restless whispers of insurrection echoed through space. The fragile peace had shattered, replaced by a storm that threatened to consume all. Arindra stood on the bridge of the Obsidian Sovereign, her eyes fixed on the holographic star map that flickered with battle markers and distress signals. "We cannot hold the outer worlds much longer," Zerkael warned beside her, voice grim. "The rebels grow bolder." She nodded, jaw tight. "We must crush them before they ignite the whole region." Malthus observed from the shadows, his tone steady but ominous. And yet, the greatest threat lies not in the fleets, but within these walls. Arindra's gaze met his. "I am aware." On the ground, Rylan's forces fought with a desperate fury. The boy who had once been a prisoner had become a commander, rallying disparate factions under the banner of the old bloodline. But his victories were costly. Each step forward revealed new fractures in his alliances, new doubts in his heart. One night, after a grueling campaign on the shattered moon of Vaedris, Rylan stood alone amid the ruins, the twin suns setting blood red on the horizon. Althar approached silently. "You carry the weight of more than war." Rylan's voice was hollow. "I feel it, tearing me apart." "Then remember who you fight for. Not for revenge, but for a future." Back in the citadel, the court simmered with tension. Lady Sierra, though weakened, plotted her return, weaving webs of influence through desperate nobles and mercenaries. The failed coup had not broken her spirit, only sharpened her resolve. Arindra convened her council for an urgent session. The room was thick with unease. "We face enemies on every front," she said. "The loyalists outside, the traitors within, and the shadow of Lady Sierra still looming." Lord Vethrin, scarred but unbroken, spoke with cautious wisdom. "Perhaps it is time to consider the council." Malthus shook his head. A council would be a battlefield of whispers and knives. Better to wield power alone than share it with vipers. Arindra weighed their words carefully, knowing that every choice bore risk. Meanwhile, Ryland's internal conflict deepened. In a rare moment of solitude, Lady Sierra visited him under the cover of night. "You have the strength to reshape the Concord," she whispered, "but only if you embrace the shadows fully." He recoiled, the lessons of the past echoing in his mind. "I will not become what I hate." She smiled sadly. "Then you walk a lonely path." The final betrayal came swiftly. A trusted general within Ryland's ranks turned traitor, delivering critical intelligence to Arindra's forces. A coordinated assault on the Loyalist fleet left them shattered and scattered. Ryland barely escaped the carnage, retreating into the dark edges of the rim. Arindra's forces pressed their advantage, reclaiming lost worlds and tightening the noose around the rebels. Yet with every victory, the cost weighed heavier. The people grew weary, hope dimmed. In a silent chamber, Arindra and Malthus confronted the bitter truth. "The Empire is breaking," she whispered, "and so am I." Malthus's voice was a cold comfort. "You must become the storm that reshapes the ashes." As the chapter closed, the war raged both outside and within. Rylan and Arindra stood on opposite sides of a galaxy aflame, their destinies entwined in a tragic dance of ambition, loyalty, and inevitable loss. The breaking storm had come, and nothing would ever be the same. The skies above the Concord were stained with fire and shadow, a maelstrom of war that reflected the turmoil festering within its heart. The citadel's ancient walls groaned under the weight of betrayal and siege, while the distant stars blinked cold and indifferent to the fate of empires. Arindra stood upon the shattered battlements, her gaze steeled against the chaos below. The weight of leadership pressed upon her like a blade, heavy, unyielding, and cruel. The Loyalist forces, led by Rylan, had launched their most daring assault yet. The battle tore through the outer districts of the citadel, a clash of steel and will, where every gain was bought in blood. Rylan fought not just for power, but for the legacy of a name stained with exile and shadow. Yet as his forces pushed forward, the whispers of doubt gnawed at him. Was he a savior or a harbinger of ruin? Inside the throne room, Arindra gathered her closest allies, their faces etched with exhaustion and resolve. "We stand at the edge of oblivion," she declared, voice ringing like a clarion. "If we fall, the Concord falls with us, but we will not yield." Malthus stepped beside her, his obsidian mask reflecting the flickering torchlight. "The final hour demands sacrifice. Loyalties will fracture, and truths will be laid bare." Amidst the turmoil, Lady Sira's machinations reached their crescendo. The Mistress of Shadows moved like a ghost through the battlefield, her agents igniting fires of discord among both armies. Rylan found himself betrayed once more, not by enemy swords, but by poison whispered in ears he thought loyal. In the heat of battle, Rylan confronted Lady Sira beneath the blood-red sky. "You have poisoned my cause," he spat, anger and pain warring in his eyes. She smiled, dark and cruel. "I forged you in shadows. Now you are mine." Their clash was not of steel, but of wills, a tempest of broken trust and bitter truths. Meanwhile, Arindra faced her own torment. Her closest confidant, Sir Kale, revealed a secret that shattered her fragile world. A conspiracy that reached to the highest echelons of the Concord. "Your crown is cracked," he warned. "Only truth can mend it." But truth was a blade that could cut both savior and sinner alike. As the battle reached its zenith, Rylan made a fateful decision. With a heavy heart, he called for a ceasefire, seeking parley with Arindra. The war could no longer be won by force alone. Their meeting was a study in contrasts. Two leaders burdened by loss, ambition, and shattered dreams. Arindra's voice was weary but resolute. "Why come now, after all the bloodshed?" Rylan's gaze was haunted. "Because this war will consume us both. Because I do not want to be the monster I feared." They spoke not as enemies, but as reflections of a shared sorrow. Yet even in this fragile moment, betrayal lurked. Lady Sira's final gambit unleashed a hidden weapon, a devastating psychic blast that shattered the council chambers and claimed countless lives. The Concord reeled, and chaos swallowed hope. The chapter closed with the Concord fractured beyond repair. Arindra and Rylan, once united by blood and vision, now stood as broken monarchs over a dying empire. The shattered crown lay between them, its weight a grim reminder that even the greatest can fall. The citadel's towering spires wept ash, their grandeur diminished beneath the weight of relentless war and ceaseless betrayal. What had once been a symbol of unity and power now lay fractured, its stones cracked, its halls stained with the blood of friends and foes alike. Arindra stood alone in the shattered throne room, the remnants of the once glorious Concord lying at her feet. Her eyes, weary and haunted, scanned the ruins of the empire she had sworn to protect. But beyond the broken walls, the final battle raged with unrelenting fury. Rylan's forces, ragged but resolute, fought against the relentless loyalists still loyal to the dying dream of the Black Regent. The clash was no longer of grand armies, but of desperate souls clinging to fading hope. In the heart of the chaos, Rylan and Arindra met once more, two titans worn thin by years of conflict, their faces etched with loss and the heavy burden of choice. "Is this how it ends?" Arindra asked, voice breaking. "Not with glory, but with ruin." Rylan's gaze was steady, but the fire in his eyes was dimmed by sorrow. "Perhaps, but even in ruin, there is truth." Lady Sira's shadow lingered still, a poison that threatened to snuff out the last flicker of light. She appeared suddenly amidst the battlefield, her dark cloak billowing like the night itself. Her voice was a whisper and a curse. "The Concord will fall, but from its ashes a new order will rise, one forged in darkness, free from the chains of loyalty and regret." Her words were both a promise and a threat. Arindra raised her blade, rallying the shattered remnants of her guard. "Then let us meet the darkness with our own light." The final confrontation was brutal, steel against shadow, hope against despair. In the midst of battle, Rylan faced Lady Sira once again. "This ends now," he declared, summoning the strength born of loss and defiance. Their duel was fierce, a tempest of wills clashing amid the ruins. With a final strike, Rylan shattered her blade, breaking the Mistress of Shadow's hold on the battlefield. But victory was not without cost. As the last of Lady Sira's agents fell, a hidden blast erupted, throwing Rylan across the shattered stone. Bloodied and broken, he struggled to rise, the weight of immortality, a cruel burden. Irindra found him moments later, her hand trembling as she reached out. "Rylan." He met her gaze, a faint smile touching his lips. "The Empire's fall is not the end. It is a beginning." The Citadel's fires began to die, the storm receding like a tide retreating from the shore. Irindra and Rylan, survivors of a fractured world, looked toward a horizon uncertain and vast. The last light of the Concord flickered, fragile yet defiant. And in that fragile glow lay the hope for what might rise from the ashes. The embers of the Citadel's fires smouldered beneath a sky heavy with silence. The once mighty Concord, cradle of empires and dreams, lay in ruin, a testament to ambition's cruel cost and the bitter price of immortality. Irindra sat on a fractured dais, the weight of her crown a chain forged from loss and regret. Around her, the hollow echoes of the fallen whispered the stories of a time now past, tales of glory, betrayal, and sacrifice. Rylan knelt beside her, his body marked by battle, his eyes reflecting the endless night beyond the shattered walls. He was eternal, yet broken, a soul caught between the hunger for power and the yearning for peace. "The empire we built," he murmured, voice raw, "was never truly ours to keep. It was a dream, and like all dreams, it fades." Irindra reached out, her hand trembling as it brushed his. "Immortality is a curse," she whispered. "To live through the death of all you love, to watch empires crumble like dust. How long before even hope becomes unbearable?" The two rulers, bound by blood and burden, shared a moment suspended between past and future. Neither fully conqueror nor victim, they embodied the tragic cycle of creation and destruction that had defined their world. Outside, the Citadel's ruins lay silent, the dying suns casting long shadows across broken statues and shattered spires. The once glorious empire was no more, replaced by a fragile peace woven from the ashes of war. In the twilight of their reign, Irindra and Rylan made a choice, not of conquest, but of surrender. They would lay down their crowns, not to yield to despair, but to open a path for new voices to rise, new empires to form, and new legends to be born. "The cost was too high," Irindra said, voice steady, despite the tears glistening on her cheeks. "But from these ashes, perhaps something stronger can grow." Rylan nodded, a faint smile breaking through the shadows. "Maybe immortality is not to live forever, but to leave behind a legacy that outlasts us." As the final light faded, the two figures rose, walking side by side into the unknown. The Concord was gone, but its story was etched into the stars, an eternal reminder of the rise and fall of empires, the price of ambition, and the fragile hope that even in endings there are beginnings. The last breath of the empire whispered through the void, and though the suns died, the memory remained, a silent promise that even in darkness, light endures. The end